It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when the air carried a slight chill, and the golden leaves danced in the breeze, falling gently onto the winding country roads. Eleanor Whitmore, a self-made millionaire whose name had become synonymous with innovation and success, decided to take a break from her hectic life. She needed time away from the endless meetings, phone calls, and emails that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. Her sleek luxury car, a symbol of her hard-earned achievements, purred as it navigated the quiet countryside, far removed from the bustling city where she spent most of her days. Eleanor loved driving herself whenever she could. It gave her a sense of control, something she cherished deeply. The open road stretched ahead of her like an endless ribbon, framed by tall trees painted in hues of orange, red, and yellow. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. For once she felt at peace, her mind free from thoughts of profit margins or market trends. The only sound was the hum of her engine and the occasional rustle of leaves being swept up by the wind. But peace, as Eleanor would soon discover, can be fleeting. Just as she rounded a bend in the road, her car sputtered unexpectedly. At first, she thought it might just be a fluke, a hiccup in the otherwise flawless machinery beneath the hood. But then came another sputter, louder this time, followed by a jarring lurch. The smooth purr of the engine faltered, replaced by an alarming, clanking noise. Instinctively, Eleanor eased her foot off the accelerator and steered the car to the side of the road. Her heart sank as the vehicle shuddered to a stop. She sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't supposed to happen, not to someone like her. She prided herself on always being prepared, always having backup plans for every scenario. Yet here she was, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no cell service to call for help. Frustration bubbled inside her as she pulled out her phone, staring at the no-signal message flashing mockingly on the screen. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped out of the car. The cool air hit her face, snapping her back to reality. She glanced around, hoping to see some sign of civilization, another car, a gas station, anything. But all she saw were rolling hills, dense woods, and an empty horizon stretching endlessly before her. The solitude that had seemed so appealing just moments ago now felt suffocating. Still, she reminded herself that panicking wouldn't solve anything. If there was one thing Eleanor Whitmore excelled at, it was problem-solving. Her eyes scanned the area until they landed on a modest farmhouse nestled in the distance. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, signaling that someone was home. Though reluctant to impose on strangers, Eleanor knew she didn't have much choice. She grabbed her purse and began walking toward the house, each step crunching against the gravel road. As she approached, she couldn't help but notice how different this place was from the world she inhabited. The farmhouse looked weathered, its paint peeling slightly, but there was a charm to it, an authenticity that stood in stark contrast to the polished glass and steel buildings she was accustomed to. Reaching the gate, Eleanor hesitated briefly before pushing it open. The sound of chickens clucking and cows mooing reached her ears, adding to the rustic atmosphere. She walked up to the front door and knocked firmly, steeling herself for whatever, or whoever, might answer. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a man who appeared to be in his late 50s. He wore faded overalls and a plaid shirt, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor. His face bore the marks of a hard-working life, yet his eyes sparkled with warmth and curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice steady and friendly. Eleanor cleared her throat, suddenly feeling self-conscious about her expensive clothes and designer handbag. "Hello," she began, forcing a polite smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but my car broke down just down the road. I don't have any cell service here, and I was wondering if you might know someone who could help." The man nodded slowly, studying her for a moment before extending a hand. "Henry Calloway," he introduced himself. "And don't worry about bothering. Happens more often than you'd think out here." Relief washed over Eleanor as she shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway. I really appreciate it. Just Henry'll do," he replied with a small chuckle. "Let me grab my tools and take a look." Might not be able to fix it right away, but I'll see what I can do." As Henry disappeared into the house, Eleanor took a moment to observe her surroundings. A vegetable garden lay off to one side, neatly tended despite the season. Nearby, a scarecrow stood guard over rows of pumpkins, their vibrant orange color glowing softly in the fading sunlight. Everything about this place felt grounded, connected to the earth in a way that made Eleanor feel both curious and strangely envious. When Henry returned, he was carrying a toolbox and wearing a worn-out baseball cap. Together, they walked back to her car, Eleanor explaining what had happened along the way. Henry listened intently, nodding occasionally as he assessed the situation. Once they reached the vehicle, he popped the hood and leaned in, examining the engine with practiced ease. Eleanor watched silently, impressed by the calm efficiency with which he worked. "Well," Henry said after a few minutes, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag, "looks like your fuel pump's gone bad. Easy enough to fix, but I'll need to tow it back to my barn. Got everything I need there." Eleanor nodded gratefully. "Thank you so much, Henry. I don't know what I would have done without your help." "No trouble at all," he replied with a dismissive wave. "You hungry? My wife Margaret always makes too much supper anyway. Be glad to have you join us while I get started on the repairs." At first, Eleanor hesitated. Accepting such hospitality felt awkward, almost intrusive. But there was something genuine about Henry's offer that made it impossible to refuse. Plus, the idea of sitting down for a meal sounded infinitely better than standing by the roadside waiting for news about her car. "All right," she agreed with a grateful smile. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you again." As Henry hitched her car to his old truck, Eleanor climbed into the passenger seat, marveling at how quickly her day had taken a turn. What had started as a peaceful escape had morphed into an unexpected adventure, one that promised to teach her lessons she hadn't even realized she needed to learn. Little did she know, this chance encounter with a humble farmer and his family would leave an indelible mark on her life, changing her perspective in ways she couldn't yet imagine. By the time Eleanor arrived at the farmhouse with Henry, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the land. The house itself was modest but inviting, with a wraparound porch adorned with potted plants and a couple of rocking chairs that looked like they'd seen many quiet evenings. The scent of something delicious wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of hay and soil. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, polished environments Eleanor was used to: boardrooms, high-rise offices, and five-star restaurants. Yet there was an undeniable charm here, a sense of belonging that felt foreign yet strangely comforting. As they stepped inside, Eleanor was greeted by Margaret Calloway, Henry's wife. She was a petite woman with silver streaks running through her dark hair, tied neatly into a bun. Her hands were flour-dusted, and she wore a faded apron over a simple dress. Despite her unassuming appearance, Margaret radiated warmth, her smile as welcoming as the home itself. "Henry," she called out cheerfully as they entered. "You didn't tell me we had company." Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, and her expression softened further. "Well, hello there. I'm Margaret. Please make yourself at home." Eleanor smiled politely, though she couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. "Thank you, Mrs. Calloway. I'm Eleanor. Your husband has been kind enough to help me with my car." "Oh, nonsense," Margaret replied with a wave of her hand. "Call me Margaret, and don't worry about the car. You're here now, and that's what matters. Dinner will be ready soon, so why don't you sit down and relax while Henry gets started on the repairs?" Before Eleanor could protest, Margaret ushered her toward the kitchen table, where a steaming pot of coffee sat alongside mismatched mugs. The room was cozy, filled with the comforting sounds of sizzling pans and clinking dishes. Eleanor hesitated for a moment before taking a seat, feeling oddly out of her element. This wasn't the type of hospitality she was accustomed to. In her world, people exchanged pleasantries over expensive lattes or champagne, not cups of coffee brewed in a humble kitchen. But there was something disarming about Margaret's sincerity, something that made Eleanor want to stay rather than rush off. While Margaret bustled around the kitchen, finishing up preparations for dinner, Henry excused himself to begin working, on the car. He promised he'd join them shortly, leaving Eleanor alone with his wife. At first, the silence between them was awkward, punctuated only by the occasional clink of utensils. But Margaret, sensing Eleanor's unease, struck up a conversation. "So, Eleanor," she began casually, "what brings you out this way? Not many folks come through these parts unless they're lost." Eleanor chuckled nervously, stirring her coffee. "I suppose I am a bit lost, in more ways than one. I was just trying to get away from everything for a little while. Sometimes, the city feels suffocating." Margaret nodded knowingly. "I can imagine. Living out here, we don't have much noise or distractions. Just the land, the animals, and each other. It's peaceful, isn't it?" "It is," Eleanor admitted, glancing out the window at the fields bathed in twilight. "But I'm sure it's not always easy." Margaret laughed softly. "No, it's not. There are days when the work never seems to end and you wonder if all the effort is worth it. But then you see the sunrise over the fields or watch the kids chase after the chickens and you remember why you do it. Life out here may be hard, but it's honest. You reap what you sow, literally and figuratively." Eleanor listened intently, captivated by Margaret's words. They carried a wisdom that came from experience, not textbooks or seminars. For someone who had built her empire on strategy and ambition, Eleanor found herself intrigued by this simpler philosophy. It was humbling, even inspiring. Dinner was served not long after, and Eleanor joined the Callaways at their rickety wooden table. The meal was nothing extravagant: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans fresh from the garden, and homemade bread. But it was hearty and flavorful, made with care and love. As they ate, conversation flowed easily. Henry and Margaret shared stories about their life on the farm, their children who had grown up and moved away, and the challenges of keeping things running smoothly year after year. Eleanor listened, fascinated by the rhythm of their existence, which seemed so different from her own. At one point, Margaret turned to Eleanor and asked, "What about you? What's your story?" Eleanor paused, unsure of how to answer. How could she possibly sum up her life in a few sentences? She thought about the countless hours spent building her business, the sacrifices she'd made along the way, and the relentless drive that had propelled her forward. But as she looked at the Callaways, she realized none of that mattered here. So instead, she said simply, "I guess you could say I've spent most of my life chasing success, building a company, making a name for myself. But lately, I've been wondering if I've lost sight of what really matters." There was a moment of silence as Henry and Margaret exchanged a glance. Then Henry leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "Success means different things to different people," he said thoughtfully. "For some, it's money or power. For others, it's family, health, or happiness. The trick is figuring out what you value most and holding on to it tight." His words lingered in the air, resonating deeply with Eleanor. She had always prided herself on knowing exactly what she wanted and going after it with unwavering determination. But sitting here, surrounded by people who lived such uncomplicated lives, she began to question whether she truly understood her own values anymore. Had her pursuit of success cost her something irreplaceable? After dinner, Henry suggested showing Eleanor around the property. Though she initially declined, not wanting to impose further, Margaret insisted. "Go on," she urged. "Fresh air will do you good. Besides, it's a beautiful night." Reluctantly, Eleanor agreed, following Henry outside. The temperature had dropped slightly, and the stars were beginning to emerge, dotting the velvety sky like diamonds. The farm was bathed in moonlight, its fields stretching endlessly into the distance. Henry pointed out various landmarks: the barn where he kept his tools, the pasture where the cows grazed, and the small orchard where apples hung heavy on the branches. "This is incredible," Eleanor murmured, taking it all in. "It's so real." Henry chuckled. "Real, huh? Yeah, I suppose it is. Out here, you don't have much choice but to face reality head on. No hiding behind fancy titles or big bank accounts. Just you, the land, and whatever comes your way." They walked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. Eventually, they reached a small hill overlooking the property. From this vantage point, the entire farm spread out below them, a patchwork of fields and structures illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. "You know," Henry said after a moment, breaking the quiet, "a lot of people think we're crazy for living like this. They say we should move to the city, find better jobs, make more money, but Margaret and I wouldn't trade this life for anything. Sure, it's tough sometimes, but it's ours. We've built it together, brick by brick, season by season." Eleanor nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She couldn't help but compare his perspective to her own. She had built an empire, yes, but at what cost? When was the last time she had taken a moment to truly appreciate what she had accomplished, or to enjoy the company of those around her? Standing here amidst the simplicity and authenticity of the Callaways' world, she felt a pang of longing for connection, for purpose, for meaning beyond the bottom line. As they headed back to the house, Eleanor realized something profound. This chance encounter might have been exactly what she needed. Stranded on a country road, far from the comforts of her usual life, she had stumbled upon a reminder of what it meant to live fully. And though she couldn't articulate it yet, she knew her journey was far from over. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for reflection. Eleanor woke up to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the lace curtains of the guest room where Margaret had insisted she stay. It was a stark contrast to the shrill beeping of her alarm clock back home, or the muffled hum of traffic outside her penthouse window. For the first time in years, Eleanor hadn't set an alarm. There were no meetings to rush to, no emails demanding her attention. The stillness felt foreign, yet oddly liberating. After dressing in the same clothes she'd worn the previous day, a fact that would have horrified her assistant, Eleanor made her way downstairs. The kitchen was alive with activity. Margaret, already bustling around as she prepared breakfast. The smell of bacon frying and biscuits baking greeted Eleanor before she even reached the doorway. "Good morning," Margaret said brightly, turning from the stove with a spatula in hand. "Sleep well?" Eleanor nodded, taking a seat at the table. "Better than I have in ages, actually. Thanks again for letting me stay." Margaret waved off her gratitude. "Nonsense. You're family now, at least until your car's fixed. Besides, it's nice having someone new around, keeps things interesting." As they ate breakfast together, Eleanor found herself slipping into the rhythm of farm life. There was no rushing, no multitasking, just the simple act of enjoying food and conversation. Margaret chatted about the weather, the upcoming harvest, and the antics of their dog Rusty, who occasionally trotted into the kitchen only to be shooed out again. Eleanor listened intently, marveling at how different this pace of life was from her own. Back in the city, every moment was scheduled, every action calculated for maximum efficiency. Here, time seemed to stretch endlessly, allowing space for connection and presence. Once breakfast was finished, Eleanor offered to help clean up, but Margaret shook her head firmly. "No need. Why don't you go see what Henry's up to? He mentioned needing some extra hands with the chickens this morning." Though hesitant, she'd never so much as held a chicken before, Eleanor agreed. She followed the sound of clucking to the coop, where Henry was busy collecting eggs. He looked up as she approached, giving her a warm smile. "Thought you might want to try your hand at something new," he said, handing her a basket. "Just reach under the hens and grab the eggs. They won't bite much." Eleanor laughed, nervously, crouching down beside him. Her first attempt was clumsy. The hen squawked indignantly as she fumbled for the egg. But after a few tries, she got the hang of it, feeling a strange sense of accomplishment each time she placed an egg gently into the basket. It was such a small task, yet it filled her with a satisfaction she hadn't felt in years. As they worked, Henry shared stories about the farm, the challenges of raising crops during droughts, the joy of watching calves take their first steps, the quiet pride of seeing fields yield a bountiful harvest. Eleanor listened, captivated by his passion. Despite the hardships, there was a deep love for the land and the life he and Margaret had built together. By mid-morning, They moved on to other chores, feeding the cows, mending a fence, stacking firewood. Each task required effort and patience, qualities Eleanor realized she had neglected in her pursuit of success. At one point, while attempting to hammer a stubborn nail into the fence post, she grew frustrated. "Why does everything take so long?" she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Henry chuckled, leaning on his own hammer. "Because nothing worth doing is easy. Takes time to build something strong, whether it's a fence or a life." His words struck a chord within her. How often had she rushed through decisions, cutting corners to achieve faster results? In her haste, had she sacrificed quality for speed, depth for convenience? The thought unsettled her, forcing her to confront the gaps in her own approach to life. Later that afternoon, Margaret invited Eleanor to join her in the kitchen to bake bread. "It's not fancy," Margaret admitted as she measured out flour, "but it's comforting. Sometimes that's all you need." Eleanor rolled up her sleeves, eager to learn. Under Margaret's guidance, she kneaded dough, shaped loaves, and slid them into the oven. The process was slow and methodical, requiring focus and care. As the bread baked, filling the house with its rich aroma, Eleanor reflected on how therapeutic it felt to create something tangible with her own hands. In Wint, her corporate world, success was abstract, numbers on a spreadsheet, deals signed in boardrooms. Here, success was measured in loaves of bread, baskets of eggs, and fields of golden wheat. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them gathered on the porch to watch the sky transform into shades of pink and orange. Rusty lay at their feet, contentedly chewing on a stick while crickets began their nightly symphony. The simplicity of the moment was overwhelming. Eleanor realized she couldn't remember the last time she had simply sat and watched the sunset without checking her phone or thinking about work. "You seem different today," Margaret observed softly, breaking the silence. "More relaxed." Eleanor smiled, wrapping her arms around herself against the cooling air. "I think I am. Being here, it's like stepping into another world. One where things make sense in a way they haven't for me in a long time." Henry nodded knowingly. "Sometimes, we get so caught up chasing what we think we want that we forget to stop and figure out if it's really making us happy. Sounds like maybe you've been doing some of that lately." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I guess I have. I've spent my whole life building this empire, climbing higher and higher, but honestly, lately it feels empty, like I've been running on a treadmill going nowhere fast." Margaret reached over and patted her hand. "Maybe it's time to step off the treadmill, dear. Find what truly feeds your soul." The comment lingered in Eleanor's mind long after the stars emerged, and the conversation drifted to lighter topics. As she settled into bed that night, exhausted from a day of physical labor but fulfilled in ways she couldn't quite explain, she knew something fundamental had shifted inside her. This detour, a broken-down car, a humble farmhouse, two kind souls willing to share their lives, had opened her eyes to possibilities she hadn't considered before. For the first time in years, Eleanor fell asleep without worrying about tomorrow. Instead, she dreamed of sunrises over fields, fresh-baked bread, and the laughter of people who lived authentically. Little did she know, these dreams would soon inspire changes in her life far greater than she could have imagined. By the fourth day of her unexpected stay at the Callaways' farm, Eleanor had settled into a routine that felt both foreign and familiar. Each morning began with the same calm rhythm, the soft creak of wooden floorboards as Margaret moved about, the kitchen, the distant mooing of cows, and the faint scent of coffee brewing. There were no alarms jolting her awake, no emails pinging incessantly on her phone, just the gentle cadence of rural life. And though she missed certain comforts of her usual existence, Eleanor found herself savoring this slower pace more than she ever thought possible. That particular morning, Henry handed her a pair of worn gloves and said with a grin, "Today's the day you learn how to milk a cow." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "A cow? You mean, like, actually touch it?" Henry laughed heartily. Well, yeah. Can't exactly use a machine out here unless you've got one tucked away in that fancy purse of yours. Margaret, overhearing, from the doorway, chimed in teasingly. Don't worry, Eleanor. Cows are gentler than they look. Just don't startle them or you might end up wearing their breakfast. With a mix of apprehension and determination, Eleanor followed Henry to the barn. Inside, the air was cool and carried the faint smell of hay and animals. A group of cows stood lazily chewing cud, seemingly unbothered by the humans entering their space. Henry led her to a large brown cow named Daisy, who regarded Eleanor with what could only be described as mild curiosity. Now, Henry instructed, positioning himself beside Daisy, you just grab hold like this. He demonstrated, wrapping his hands around the teat and squeezing gently. Milk squirted into the bucket below with a satisfying plunk. Your turn. Eleanor hesitated, eyeing the cow nervously. She'd never been particularly fond of animals. They weren't exactly part of her urban lifestyle, but she didn't want to appear unwilling. Taking a deep breath, she knelt down and mimicked Henry's movements. At first, nothing happened. Then, after adjusting her grip, a small stream of milk splashed into the bucket. I did it, she exclaimed, turning to Henry with a triumphant smile. He nodded approvingly. Told you it wasn't rocket science. Now keep going till she's done. As Eleanor continued milking, she marveled at the simplicity of the task. It required focus, patience, and a steady hand, all qualities she prided herself on in her professional life, but applied here in an entirely different context. For once, her efforts weren't tied to profit margins or quarterly reports. Instead, they contributed directly to something tangible and necessary. By the time she finished, her arms ached slightly, but she felt a strange sense of pride in having accomplished something so basic yet meaningful. Later that afternoon, Margaret invited Eleanor to help her gather eggs again, this time teaching her how to check for cracks and sort them properly. They worked side by side in companionable silence, interrupted only by the occasional cluck of a disgruntled hen. As they carried the baskets back to the house, Margaret remarked, "You're getting the hang of things. Almost makes me think you could live out here full time." Eleanor chuckled, though the idea lingered in her mind longer than she expected. Could she really leave behind her high-powered career for a simpler life? The thought was daunting yet intriguing. Over the past few days, she had discovered joys she hadn't realized she was missing: the satisfaction of physical labor, the beauty of nature, the warmth of genuine human connection. These experiences felt richer, somehow truer, than anything she had known in the city. That evening after dinner, Henry took Eleanor on another walk around the property. This time, they ventured farther than before, exploring areas she hadn't seen yet. They passed through fields dotted with wildflowers, climbed a hill overlooking the valley, and stopped by a small pond where frogs croaked softly in the twilight. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass. As they stood gazing at the stars, Henry spoke quietly. "You've been thinking a lot these past few days, haven't you?" Eleanor nodded, pulling her sweater tighter around her. "Yeah, I guess I have, being here. It's made me realize how disconnected I've become, not just from other people, but from myself. I've spent so much time chasing success that I forgot to ask if it was making me happy." Henry tilted his head thoughtfully. Success isn't bad. It's important to have goals, dreams. But when those things start controlling you instead of the other way around, that's when trouble starts. Sometimes we need to step back and figure out what really matters. His words resonated deeply with Eleanor. She thought about her life in the city, the endless meetings, the constant pressure to perform, the isolation that came with being at the top. Was any of it worth the toll it took on her well-being? Had she sacrificed too much in pursuit of ambition? The next morning, Eleanor decided to try baking bread again, determined to improve upon her previous attempt. Under Margaret's patient guidance, she mixed ingredients, kneaded dough, and shaped loaves with newfound confidence. When the bread emerged from the oven golden brown and fragrant, Eleanor felt a surge of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced in years. "This is amazing," she said, slicing into the loaf and handing a piece to Margaret. "I can't," Believe I made this. Margaret smiled proudly. See? You've got a knack for it. Maybe there's more to you than just spreadsheets and boardrooms. Eleanor laughed, though the comment struck a chord. For so long, she had defined herself solely by her professional achievements. But here, amidst flower-dusted countertops and sunlit fields, she was discovering parts of herself she had neglected, or perhaps never even knew existed. On her final evening at the farm, the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the sky fade from pink to purple. Rusty lay curled up at their feet, snoring softly while crickets chirped in the background. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost magical. You know, Eleanor said after a long pause, I never expected this trip to turn out the way it has. When my car broke down, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen, but now, I'm not so sure. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. Sometimes life throws us curveballs for a reason. Maybe this was your chance to slow down and see things differently. Henry nodded in agreement. And maybe it's not just about fixing your car. Maybe it's about fixing something inside yourself. Eleanor sat quietly, letting their words sink in. She knew she couldn't stay forever. The world beyond the farm awaited her, but she also knew she wouldn't return to it unchanged. This detour had given her perspective, clarity, and a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, she vowed to approach it with the lessons she had learned here, to value simplicity, cherish connections, and find joy in the everyday moments that make life truly rich. As the stars twinkled above and the night grew cooler, Eleanor felt a profound gratitude, not just for the kindness of the Callaways, but for the opportunity to step off the treadmill, even if only briefly. Little did she know this experience would plant seeds of change that would blossom far beyond her wildest expectations. The morning Eleanor left the Callaways' farm dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself wanted to bid her farewell with a touch of warmth. She stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, feeling an unexpected heaviness in her chest. Though her luxury car had been repaired the previous evening, thanks to Henry's steady hands and decades-old tools, it wasn't just the vehicle that felt restored. Something inside Eleanor had shifted too, though she couldn't quite put it into words. Henry and Margaret were waiting for her by the gate, their faces lined with smiles but tinged with a hint of sadness. Margaret stepped forward first, pulling Eleanor into a tight embrace. "Take care of yourself, dear," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "And don't be a stranger." Eleanor hugged her back, blinking away tears. "Thank you for everything, Margaret. I'll never forget this place, or you two, or you." Henry nodded solemnly, shaking her hand firmly before pulling her into a brief, awkward hug. "Remember what we talked about," he said gruffly, his eyes twinkling despite his serious tone. "Success is important, but it's not everything. Don't lose sight of what makes you happy." "I won't," Eleanor promised, her voice trembling slightly. "You've both taught me so much, more than you'll ever know." As she climbed into her car, waving one last time at the couple standing by the gate, Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. For years, she had prided herself on being self-reliant, on not needing anyone else to succeed. Yet here she was, leaving behind two people who had given her more wisdom, kindness, and perspective than she had ever imagined possible. The realization humbled her and inspired her. The drive back to the city was long and quiet, giving Eleanor plenty of time to reflect. As the countryside faded into suburbs and eventually skyscrapers, she found herself replaying every moment of her stay at the farm. The smell of fresh bread wafting through the kitchen, the sound of chickens clucking in the coop, the feel of cool evening air while stargazing with Henry. All of it lingered vividly in her mind. These memories weren't glamorous or extravagant. They were simple, honest, and deeply human, and somehow that made them all the more precious. Back in her penthouse apartment, surrounded by sleek furniture and panoramic views of the city skyline, Eleanor felt out of place. The space, once a symbol of her achievements, now seemed cold and impersonal. She wandered from room to room, trying to shake off the unease, until she finally settled on her couch with a cup of coffee. But even the rich aroma of her favorite blend couldn't distract her from the questions swirling in her mind. Who was she really? What did she want out of life? And how could she reconcile the person she had become with the person she wanted to be? Over the next few weeks, Eleanor began making small changes. She started by reducing her workload, delegating tasks to trusted colleagues, and setting stricter boundaries around her personal time. At first, it felt strange, almost wrong, to step back from the relentless pace she had maintained for so long. But as days turned into weeks, she noticed something remarkable. The world didn't fall apart without her constant oversight. In fact, her team thrived under the newfound autonomy, delivering results that exceeded her expectations. Encouraged by this shift, Eleanor decided to take things further. She reconnected with old friends she hadn't spoken to in years, inviting them over for dinner or simply catching up over the phone. She joined a local gardening club, drawn by the idea of nurturing plants the way Margaret had nurtured her garden. Slowly but surely, she began filling the gaps in her life, the connections, hobbies, and passions she had sacrificed in pursuit of success. One day, while scrolling through social media, Eleanor came across a post about rural communities struggling to access affordable health care. An idea sparked in her mind. Why not use her resources to make a difference? She reached out to Henry and Margaret, asking permission to invest in projects that would benefit their town and others like it. They were hesitant at first, wary of accepting help from someone whose wealth dwarfed their own. But when Eleanor explained her intentions, not charity but partnership, they agreed. With their guidance, Eleanor launched initiatives aimed at improving infrastructure, supporting local farmers, and providing educational opportunities for children in rural areas. It wasn't flashy or headline-grabbing work, but it was meaningful. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly fulfilled, knowing that her efforts were creating tangible change in people's lives. Months passed, and Eleanor returned to the Callaways' farm several times, each visit deepening her bond with Henry and Margaret. On one such trip, she arrived bearing gifts, new farming equipment, solar panels for the barn, and a plaque commemorating their contributions to the community. Henry chuckled good-naturedly, saying, "You didn't have to do all this, Eleanor. We were happy enough the way things were." "I know," she replied with a smile, "but I wanted to. You've given me so much perspective, friendship, a second chance at living authentically. This is my way of saying thank you." Margaret wiped away a tear, pulling Eleanor into another warm hug. "We're proud of you, dear. So proud," as Eleanor stood there surrounded by the people and land that had changed her life. She realized something profound. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars or accolades. It was found in the moments that brought joy, the relationships that offered support, and the choices that aligned with one's values. Her journey, from a broken-down car on a lonely road to discovering a renewed sense of purpose, had taught her that lesson in the most unexpected way. Years later, Eleanor often reflected on that fateful autumn afternoon when everything changed. What had begun as an inconvenience, a stranded car and a humble farmhouse, had blossomed into a transformative experience. The Callaways had shown her that life's greatest treasures weren't shiny or expensive. They were rooted in simplicity, authenticity, and love. And though her path remained unique, she carried those lessons with her always, guiding her toward a future filled with meaning and gratitude. Eleanor's transformation wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a gradual process like the changing of seasons, slow, steady, and inevitable. But as months turned into years, the ripple effects of her time at the Callaways' farm became undeniable. Her life had taken on a new rhythm, one that balanced ambition with authenticity, success with simplicity. Yet what truly set this chapter apart was how Eleanor chose to share her journey, not just with those closest to her, but with the wider world. One crisp spring morning, Eleanor found herself standing behind a podium in a packed auditorium. The room buzzed with anticipation as business leaders, entrepreneurs, and students eagerly awaited her keynote speech at an annual leadership conference. For years, She had been invited to speak about her rise to success, her strategies for building a tech empire, and her insights on innovation. This time, however, Eleanor had decided to talk about something entirely different: failure. "I once thought failure meant losing control," she began, her voice steady yet vulnerable. "But I've come to realize that sometimes failure is exactly what we need to regain it." She went on to recount the story of her broken-down car, the kind farmer who helped her, and the lessons she learned during her stay at the Callaway's farm. She spoke candidly about the emptiness she had felt despite her wealth, the disconnect between her professional achievements and personal fulfillment, and the profound impact of stepping into a simpler, more grounded way of life. "When I left that farm," she continued, "I didn't just take my repaired car with me. I carried away a renewed understanding of what it means to live fully. Success isn't about climbing higher or accumulating more. It's about finding joy in the everyday, nurturing relationships, and staying true to yourself. Those are the things that make life rich." The audience listened intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. When Eleanor finished speaking, the room erupted into applause, not the polite clapping reserved for obligatory speeches, but a heartfelt ovation that echoed through the hall. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, eager to share their own stories of struggle, resilience, and rediscovery. Many thanked her for reminding them of what truly mattered. Inspired by the response to her speech, Eleanor decided to write a book titled Lessons from the Farm: Finding Meaning Beyond Success. It chronicled her experiences and reflections, weaving together anecdotes from her time with the Callaways and practical advice for readers seeking balance in their own lives. The book became an instant bestseller, resonating with audiences across generations. People connected with its message of slowing down, embracing simplicity, and prioritizing what truly brought happiness. Through the proceeds of the book, Eleanor established a foundation dedicated to supporting rural communities. Named after Henry and Margaret, the two people who had unknowingly sparked her transformation, the Callaway Foundation provided grants for education, health care, and sustainable agriculture initiatives. Eleanor traveled extensively, visiting towns and villages where the foundation's work was making a difference. Along the way, she met countless individuals whose resilience and generosity reminded her of the couple who had welcomed her into their home all those years ago. Despite her growing influence, Eleanor never lost sight of the values she had cultivated during her time on the farm. She continued to visit Henry and Margaret regularly, often bringing along friends or colleagues who were curious about the place that had changed her life. Each visit reinforced her belief in the power of connection and community. On one such occasion, Eleanor arrived bearing exciting news. "I've decided to buy some land nearby," she announced over dinner. "Not too much, just enough to build a small cabin where I can escape when city life gets overwhelming. And maybe grow a garden, if you're willing to teach me, Margaret." Garrett beamed, clearly delighted. "Of course, dear. We'll have you digging in the dirt in no time." Henry raised an eyebrow playfully. "Just don't expect us to bail you out if your tractor breaks down." Everyone laughed, the warmth of shared laughter filling the cozy kitchen. As Eleanor looked around the table at the faces she had grown to love, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just a second home. It was a reminder of who she was and who she wanted to be. In the years that followed, Eleanor's dual life became her greatest strength. By day, she remained a formidable force in the business world, leading her company with vision and integrity. But by night, or whenever she could steal away, she retreated to her cabin, trading boardroom suits for gardening gloves and high heels for muddy boots. She hosted gatherings for friends and family, cooked meals using ingredients from her garden, and spent hours gazing at the stars, just as she had done with Henry all those years ago. Her commitment to giving back also expanded beyond the Callaway Foundation. Eleanor partnered with organizations focused on mental health, environmental conservation, and youth mentorship, using her platform to amplify causes close to her heart. She encouraged others to embrace vulnerability, to see setbacks not as failures, but as opportunities for growth. As she grew older, Eleanor reflected on her journey with a sense of peace. She had started as a driven young woman determined to conquer the world, only to discover that true fulfillment came not from conquest, but from connection. The Callaways had shown her that life's greatest treasures weren't material possessions or professional accolades. They were moments shared with loved ones, acts of kindness extended to strangers, and choices made with intention. On her 75th birthday, surrounded by family, friends, and the Callaways themselves, Eleanor raised a glass to toast the life she had built. To beginnings, she said with a smile, her eyes shining with emotion, and to the people who remind us what really matters. The room erupted into cheers, and as Eleanor sat back, basking in the love and laughter around her, she knew she had finally found the answer to the question that had haunted her for so long. What makes life worth living? It wasn't money, fame, or power. It was the simple, beautiful act of being human, of loving, learning, and leaving the world a little better than she had found it.